Good afternoon. This is Chapter 5, Ethics, Corporate Social Responsibility, and Sustainability. Our learning objectives are the following. Understand the ethical, corporate social responsibility, and sustainability issues faced by international businesses. Recognize an ethical, corporate social responsibility and/or sustainability dilemma. Identify the causes of unethical behavior by managers as they relate to business, corporate social responsibility, or sustainability. Describe the different philosophical approaches to business ethics that apply globally, and lastly, explain how global managers can incorporate ethical considerations into their decision-making in general, as well as corporate social responsibility and sustainability initiatives. A lot of objectives today. Introduction: Ethics, corporate social responsibility, and sustainability are social issues that arise frequently in international business. Ethics are the core starting point. Business ethics are the accepted principles of right or wrong that govern the conduct of business people. Ethical strategy refers to a strategy or course of action that does not violate a company's business ethics. Many ethical issues rooted in differences in political systems, laws, economic development, and culture might be normal in one country, yet illegal in another. Incredibly difficult to come up with global standards. Most common ethical issues involve employment practices, human rights, environmental regulations, corruption, and moral obligations of the multinational corporations. Employment practices. When work conditions in a host nation are inferior to those in a multinational home nation, which standards should apply? Home nation, host nation, something in between. Let's take a look at the Nike case. Nike did not break the law, but the case raised questions regarding the ethics of using sweatshop labor. To guard against ethical abuses, firms should establish minimal acceptable standards that safeguard the basic rights and dignity of employees, audit foreign subsidiaries and contractors regularly to ensure standards are being met, and then take corrective action as necessary. The one thing I'd like to point out is with sneakers costing $150, the people making them, are they making enough money to survive? Certainly there should be enough money in there for them to be paid enough so that they can survive. Because where is all of this profit going? Is it being shared equally, or is it just being shotgunned into the corporate coffers? Human rights. Basic human rights found in developed nations are not universally accepted worldwide. What about freedom of association, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of movement, and freedom from political repression? Apartheid system in Africa, it mandated segregation and prohibited blacks from managing whites. Businesses from developed countries questioned the ethics of doing business in South Africa. And the United Nations had something called Sustainable Development Goals 2030. General Motors adopted the Sullivan Principles. Companies should not obey the apartheid rules in its operation in South Africa. Companies should promote abolition of apartheid laws, and was not sufficient to break down the apartheid regime. Repressive regimes still exist in the world. Is it ethical for multinational corporations to do business with repressive regimes? Does multinational investment bring change to these regimes and foster economic growth and raise living standards? These are good questions, and they also require our thought. Are some regimes so repressive that investment cannot be justified on ethical grounds? Environmental pollution. Problems occur when environmental regulations differ between host and home nations. Tragedy of the commons occurs when a resource held in common by all but owned by no one is overused by individuals, resulting in its degradation. Global tragedy of the commons is enhanced by corporations that move production locations where they are free to pump pollutants into the atmosphere or dump them in oceans or rivers, thereby harming these valuable global commons. Is it ethical for a company to escape regulations by moving production to a nation with lax regulations? People wearing breathing masks at Tiananmen Square in China's capital city of Beijing. Having traveled to China, I can tell you that it was really concerning. I'm in Changsha, and I take a look at the weather every morning. And what was interesting was they had a pollution index indicating how polluted the air was, because While Changsha downtown area, it looks very clean and there are no industry around. On the outskirts of the city, it's completely surrounded by companies that are manufacturing, and they are polluting because the air there is measured every day and it tells you how polluted it is. So it was a little disconcerting seeing that every day to see how polluted the air was. Corruption. Corruption has been a problem in almost every society in history and continues today. The U.S. has something to prevent that with companies that do business internationally, and it's called the U.S. Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, or FCPA. It regulates conduct of international business and the taking of bribes and other unethical actions. Amended to allow for facilitating payments. What does that mean? Convention on Combating Bribery of Foreign Public Official in International Business Transactions. It makes the bribery of foreign officials a criminal defense. Corruption continued. Ethical implications of corruption. Are bribes the price to pay to do a greater good? It may improve efficiency and help growth. Do bribes reduce business incentives to invest? Reduces the returns on business investment and leads to low economic growth. Some multinationals adopting a zero tolerance policy, BP and Dow Corning. But international corporations don't play by the same rules as the U.S. plays. So how would the U.S. deal with another foreign company that allows bribery? How do you compete against that? It's not a level playing field. Ethical dilemmas, ethical obligations of multinational corporations are not always clear-cut. How should corporations handle ethical dilemmas regarding employment, human rights, corruption, and environmental pollution? Well, there's pressure from customers and stakeholders to be transparent in ethical decision-making. No universal worldwide agreement about what constitutes accepted ethical principles. Ethical dilemmas are situations in which no alternatives seem ethically acceptable. Here we are. We'll take a look at a chart here. In the center, we have ethical behavior, but we have all of these different determinants. We have societal culture, decision-making processes, leadership, unrealistic performance goals, organizational culture, and personal ethics. The problem that we encounter with international business is there's a lot of pressure to produce results. Remember, many people are compensated by the results that are generated by these companies. And if you have unrealistic performance goals, maybe by bribing somebody or whatever, you could reach them or whatever. So there's a lot of ethical determinants here, and it also drives ethical behavior. What are the roots of unethical behavior? Well, basically dishonest people, right? Well, why do managers behave unethically? Here's some reasons. There's 6 determinants. One is personal ethics, decision-making processes, organizational culture, unrealistic performance goals, leadership, and societal culture. From a personal ethics standpoint, it's how you were brought up. Someone once asked me, how do you determine your ethics? And, what do you believe in? And I always said, well, I look at it this way. If I tell my mother a story, how is my mother going to react? And depending on how my mother reacts, she was a very ethical, fair-minded woman. And if I would be embarrassed to tell my mother about something, I think that answers my question about whether something is ethical or not. So that's what's I call it my ethical compass. You need to figure out what your ethical compass is. Generally accepted principles of right and wrong governing the conduct of individuals is how we define personal ethics. The formation of ethics is guided by our parents, our schools, our religion, and the media. Basically, all of your outside influences. Expatriate managers may face pressure to violate their personal ethics because they are away from their ordinary social context and culture, and it may be the norm of culture when you're in that foreign country. The parent company may also pressure managers to meet unrealistic goals that can only be fulfilled by acting unethically. Decision-making processes. Business people may act unethically when they fail to ask, is this decision or action ethical? Problems arise in processes that do not incorporate ethical considerations into business decision-making. And you need to better understand how individuals make decisions that are ethical or unethical in an organizational environment. When it comes to organizational culture, values and norms shared among an organization's employees. Some organizational culture may not encourage people to think through ethical consequences of decisions. Then there's also the problem of unrealistic performance goals, pressure from parent company to meet unrealistic performance goals by cutting corners or acting unethically. Foreign managers may be fearful of telling corporate, you know what, I'm not going to be able to meet those numbers because maybe they'll be replaced. And also, it's important for anybody when they're advancing in a multinational company that they have international experience, and the international experience obviously is expected to be positive and good for the company. So sometimes there are unrealistic performance goals that cannot be achieved without violating ethics. Leadership helps to establish the culture of an organization and set the examples that others follow. Employees often take cues from business leaders. Societal culture. Cultures that emphasize individualism and uncertainty avoidance are more likely to stress ethical behavior than other cultures where masculinity and power distance are emphasized. Straw men, often inappropriate guidelines for ethical decision making. Then we have something called the Friedman Doctrine, which is named after Nobel Prize winning economist Milton Friedman, and it postulates the social responsibility of business is to increase profits, so as long as the company stays within those rules. Then you have something called cultural relativism. Ethics are a reflection of culture. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. The righteous moralist. Home country standards of ethics should be followed in foreign countries, typically associated with managers from developed nations. It's also criticized for its proponents going too far. Then we have something called the naive immoralist. If a manager of a multinational sees that firms from other nations are not following ethical norms in a host nation, that manager should not either. Utilitarian and Kantian ethics. Utilitarian approaches to ethics, philosopher David Hume, Jeremy Bentham, and John Stuart Mill. The moral worth of actions or practices is determined by their consequences. Actions are desirable if they lead to the best possible balance of good consequences over bad consequences. Best decisions are those that produce the greatest good for the greatest number of people. But we've got some drawbacks here because it's difficult to measure benefits, costs, and risks of the action. It also fails to consider justice. In Kantian ethics, it's based on the philosophy of Immanuel Kant. People should be treated as ends and never purely as means to the ends of others. People have dignity and need to be respected. Contemporary moral philosophers view Kantian ethics as incomplete. The system has no place for moral sentiments such as sympathy or caring. Rights theories. Human beings have fundamental rights and privileges that transcend national borders and cultures. Moral theorists argue that fundamental human rights form the basis of a moral compass that managers should use in ethical decision-making. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted by the United Nations and ratified by almost every country. It lays down principles that should be adhered to irrespective of the culture. Along with the right come obligations. We have the right to free speech and must respect the free speech of others. Obligations fall on more than one class of moral agents, any person or institution that is capable of moral action, and includes governments and corporations. Justice theories focus on the attainment of a just distribution of economic goods and services. A just distribution is a distribution of goods and services that is considered fair and equitable. John Rawls argued that all economic goods and services should be distributed equally, except when an unequal distribution would work to everyone's advantage. Impartiality is guaranteed by a veil of ignorance, and difference is in principle. Then we have 360 view managerial implications, making ethical decisions internationally. Number one, hiring and promotion. Hire and promote people with a strong sense of personal ethics. Businesses can give potential employees psychological tests and check with prior employers regarding ethical behavior. Prospective employees should investigate the ethical climate in an organization prior to taking a position. Number two, organizational culture and leadership. Articulate values that place a strong emphasis on ethical behavior. Emphasize the importance of a code of ethics. Implement a system of incentives and rewards that recognize people who engage in ethical behavior and sanction those who do not. Number three, put decision-making processes in place that require people to consider the ethical dimension of business decisions. Does the decision fall within the accepted values and standards that typically apply in the organizational environment? Is there a willingness to see the decision communicated to all stakeholders affected by it? And would people close to me, my family, friends, colleagues, approve of the decision? Making ethical decisions internationally continued. 5-step process to think through ethical problems. Step 1, identify which stakeholders the decision would affect and in what ways. And there's internal stakeholders and there's external. A stakeholder analysis involves the moral imagination, standing in the shoes of a stakeholder and asking how a proposed decision might impact that stakeholder. Number 2, determine whether a proposed decision would violate the fundamental rights of any stakeholders. 3, establish a moral intent, place moral concerns ahead of other concerns in cases where either the fundamental rights of stakeholders or key moral principles have been violated. Step number 4, engage in ethical behavior. And number 5, audit decisions to make sure they are consistent with ethical principles. Ethics officers. Institute ethical officers to A, assess the needs and risks that our ethics program must address. B, develop and distribute a code of ethics. C, conduct training programs for employees. D, establish and maintain confidentiality of employees. F, comply with government laws and regulations. H, monitor and audit ethical conduct. I, take action where appropriate. And periodically reviewing and updating the code of ethics. Moral courage. This enables managers to walk away from a decision that is profitable yet unethical. Given an employee the strength to say no to a superior who instructs employees to pursue actions that are unethical, and also gives employees the integrity to go public to the media and blow the whistle on persistent unethical behavior within a company. CSR, or corporate social responsibility. With power comes the social responsibility to give something back to the societies that enabled these multinational companies to grow and to prosper. It advocates and argues that businesses need to recognize their noblesse oblige, which is Latin. Power can be used in a positive way to increase social welfare, which is ethical, or used in a manner that is ethically and morally sus or suspect. 7, sustainability. Sustainable strategies help the firm make good profits without harming the environment while acting in a socially responsible manner to stakeholders. The core idea is organizations' actions do not exert a negative impact on the ability of future generations to meet their own economic needs, and actions impart long-run economic and social benefits on stakeholders. Sound like a run-on sentence to me. In any case, use precautionary principle when assessing a course of action. Do not precipitate or participate in a decision that results in a tragedy of the commons. Thank you for listening, and have a good afternoon.